Jamal, Ollie, and Craig, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thank you. I'm Jamal Watkins, Adobe Captivate Prime Learning Evangelist. And today we're here to talk to you about the content marketplace, which is powered by Go1, which is available directly within Captivate Prime. The content marketplace powered by Go1 gives you access to top-notch learning programs from an extensive content library of 70,000 courses, which range from soft skills and creative cloud training to business, sales, and leadership modules. You could also take advantage of expert curated set of courses and course bundles from top content providers that help to really upskill and upskill employees across various skills and interest areas. So coupled with the unique AI personalized capabilities of Captivate Prime, Content Marketplace powered by Go1 does deliver hyper-personalized learning experiences across web and mobile. So it's best-in-class learning content. It offers diverse learning content designed for every role that's virtually appropriate for every functional area within an enterprise. You can easily filter courses from an extensive library by topics and skill sets and create defined learning paths for your respective workforce. There's content relevancy for refined learning experiences where you can choose from the content library that not just offers wide variety of skill-centric courses, but also prioritizes multiple content formats so that you can deliver relevant learning experiences. And most importantly, accessibility of content for every unique learner. Prime will help to make that experience flexible and positive for users. And finally, I'm joined today by two trusted partners from Go1, and that is Craig Hamill, which is he's a senior customer success manager, a former head of L&D. Craig has 20 years of experience in supporting regional and global learning projects. Craig now supports enterprise L&D teams to deliver digital learning strategies to global workforces. And last but not least, we have Ollie Browning. Ollie also has 20 years of experience in the L&D industry, working with clients developing organizational performance through learning transformation. Ollie and his team are in the UK, and they support our clients on their journey to improving performance of learning in this digital world. I will hand it over to Ollie, and thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Jamal, and thanks everybody for joining me and my colleague Craig. Delighted to be here this evening, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you happen to be joining us from around the world, but also delighted to be working in partnership with Adobe and bringing the Go1 aggregated content library directly into Captivate Prime. So what we want here to talk about today, as the title suggests, is how do you help develop the capabilities of your current and future workforce? And I think a sort of caveat to that up front, this absolutely comes from a digital lens, absolutely recognising there are a number of ways that workforces can be developed, but given some of the challenges we faced over the last 12 months, 18 months, and going forward, we're certainly seeing a rise in digital. So if I just move to the next slide. Excuse me, really three things that I'd like you to sort of take away that hopefully we can unpack. First of all, just a bit of context about some of the workforce disruption that's happening and some of the skills that are going to be impacted from that. Perhaps the sort of main meat of the discussion is around how to validate the right content for your learning strategy. There's a whole heap of content out there from a large range of providers, both paid for and freely available, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those choices and how to help you as an L&D department and an organisation identify the most appropriate content for your strategy. And perhaps one of the most important prerequisites to any program is how do you make sure that whatever you're investing in, whatever the skills, capability, programs, etc. that you're doing, that this absolutely aligns to your organisation's goals and missions and objectives. And Craig's going to talk about the model that he uses extensively with our global clients. So hopefully that's what you are here to absorb and listen to, and we'd definitely welcome some questions throughout the discussion. Excuse me. So just to start, the world of work is changing quickly, perhaps quicker than was really anticipated by a lot of predictions a while ago. So these were just a couple of interesting stats that I took from the Future of Job reports from the World Economic Forum. And I think, perhaps the most concerning is by 2025, 85 million jobs worldwide displaced by a shift in the division of labour. And then in addition to that, for last year, a 400% increase in the number of individuals seeking out online learning. I know from our business, I can absolutely testify to the sort of increased number of people, perhaps who hadn't considered digital or online as a viable solution for their business, are really starting to reach out. And finally, given the need to think differently, the need to invest in different technologies, part of the resistance that organisations are seeing are, over 55% of businesses can't adopt technology because they just don't have the local skills. And I just sort of add one more more personal stat. I read a stat the other day that I've got 3 children under the age of 9, all at school, and I read that 2/3 of those children at that age will do a job that doesn't exist today. And I think when you consider the pace of change of skills and the pace of change of technology, there's a serious landscape and there's a serious gap emerging specifically around skills, both the attraction of talent, but also the upskilling and reskilling. So just a bit of a backdrop there. And I think then when you further look at, well, how do organisations expect to react to that? There's been a lot discussed and shared around digital transformation. So, it's not surprised that the top number of people surveyed, again from the World Economic Forum, over 55% of organisations were having to change the composition of the value chain. Digital disruption is continuing to be rife across a number of industries. So rethinking business models, reducing the current workforce with technology, perhaps not in always the most surprising areas beyond manufacturing and supply chain. Some really exciting developments happening in technology, and I think whilst I think that can be challenging and sort of removing the number of individuals in the workforce, I think that there is also statistics talking about what the opportunity creates. So it's not necessarily displacing workforce; it's just changing the skills. And perhaps what some of you are having to work through. I know as a leader of our organisation, having to work through that at the moment. Where does our company operate? How does it operate? So a large number of people having to rethink just the sort of construct of working environments and offices and commutes and all of those areas. And then ultimately, how can that workforce expand and sort of how can technology enable that? So there's quite a significant wave of change, and perhaps 2025 is sort of too much of a long horizon when we consider some of the skills, the shelf life of skills, etc. So I just wanted to sort of share a couple of those points. And then Craig, I'll sort of hand over to you, but this was sort of interesting, again, the sort of top 10 skills of 2025. And as Jamal said, I've been in the training industry a long time, and a lot of these skills are sort of relatively new to organisations, and certainly a very different makeup of skills that are being required within an organisation, and particularly in the digital environment. And I talk to a lot of vendors all the time. Perhaps traditional areas for digital investment have traditionally been maybe some of the soft skills and sort of some of the more desktop applications. So I think we're really having to think differently about what skills are required and how to fulfil them. Craig, I welcome you into the conversation. Any sort of reflections or observations of where you're seeing this resonate with your customers?
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. It's actually a really interesting read if you haven't checked out the World Economic Forum Future Jobs report, because they last time, I think it was back in 2016, released an edition where they kind of track the cross-functional skills that are in increase in demand. And I think, as Ollie said, this is an illustration of that. And what's actually happened is skills such as critical thinking and analysis, as well as problem solving, has actually stayed at the top of the agenda, and that's with a year-on-year consistency. And we've definitely seen those skills being asked for as requirements from lots of our customers. I think what's also quite interesting is some of the newly emerging this year are skills in self-management, such as active listening, resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. I think there's probably some influence there in terms of the the pandemic, particularly around resilience and stress, and the flexibility that's aligned to sort of hybrid learning. And we definitely are seeing those interesting themes coming through when we're talking with our customers and creating their content for them. I think if you look at this really closely, and if you do end up looking at the report, what they've done is they've ended up grouping into 4 areas. There's problem solving, there's self-management, there's working with people, as well as technology use and development. So it's a really interesting read. And as Ollie has alluded to, there are plenty of our customers that some of these skills have been around for a number of years, but also there's some new ones coming through, and we're definitely seeing that alignment with our customer base. And I think because of some of those new topics coming through in disruption, there's also some disruption that's influencing us as vendors in terms of the solutions that we put in place, the learning interventions that we look at aligning to, and particularly those skills and capabilities that are required to support our workforces moving forwards. So if you can just change the slide for me, what I wanted to talk about here was stay on that theme of disruption and influencers. We know, we've definitely seen it, that change is happening at a massive scale. There's a definite scalability shift. There seems to be more disruptors, more influencers. So we thought it'd be nice to kind of put this into kind of 4 perspectives really that we can start looking at. So first of all, if you look at the global trends have a massive influence. Both me and Ollie have been in the L&D industry for a number of years, and there are new topics, all the time being discussed, new ones on the horizon. Some of them will be not new to you. Some of them have been existing for years. So the likes of sort of upskilling and reskilling, changing roles and changing the ways of working. There's the definite acceleration of digital skills and that migration to digital, whether that be fully or blended. There's social learning, micro and macro learning. There's performance over skills. There's that continuous evolution of products and services that we've been bombarded with. And there's even the immersive technologies such as artificial intelligence. So there's always a definite shift in terms of these global trends. And I think if I was kind of offering some top tips, which I often do to my customer base, is about staying calm and not feeling too pressurized to kind of conform and implement. Remember, every organization is different. You need to understand your culture. You need to understand the relevance to your organization. You need to make sure that timing's right and not just react and sort of jump into that head first. If you then look at the organizational shift, again, this is influencing the way in which we are looking at the skills and capabilities of our future workforces. So there could be certain external triggers such as employee well-being, which has been impacted by COVID. There might be sort of higher attrition rates. When we think about recruitment and retention, it's often the backbone to many of our businesses. But all of a sudden, it might be a higher priority on our agenda to ensure that we've got the right skills in the right place at the right time. People have been bombarded with jobs all the time. So we need to be able to try and retain the staff that we've got, and making sure that they've got the right skills at the right time is a definite part of holding on to them. There's the transition to the hybrid workforce. Some organisations are already there and working in a hybrid model. Some are very new to us to it. So it's working through some of those challenges and the changes in the working environment, which also comes with having new skills and capabilities, whether it's being a virtual manager or whether it's remotely onboarding somebody. There's a definite shift in terms of how the organisations are changing. There's also senior leaders within the business that all of a sudden are taking, things more seriously when it comes to L&D, which is really refreshing, having worked in the L&D industry for a number of years. So whether that's alignment to missions, values, culture, core values, it would definitely, there's a reflection and an influence on that. We've then got the employee shift. I've definitely seen that there's more of an appetite for personal development and career advancement. And definitely at Go One, when we work with our clients, there sometimes are some core themes and strategical themes that we're working to, but we're continuously being bombarded with a number of requirements, some very niche and specific, some very common. But there is definitely that appetite for self-directed learning and people taking more ownership for their own learning. We're seeing that there's a direct link to performance within certain roles where we're measured on OKRs and objectives. There's definitely the role of technology that's definitely having a part to play, having a mobile at hand to be able to do that and bringing that into the classroom, utilizing Microsoft Teams and other applications into the way in which we use technology. And still, I think working closely with HR departments as well, they're still seeing within exit interviews that salary isn't always the be all and end all. There's also the fact that learning and development means a lot to people. So there's certainly that greater demand, need for the learning in the flow of work and more of a pressure on organisations to react. And finally, there's the L&D shift. Are we set up to service and support any hybrid learning? Do our L&D teams actually have the right skills to deliver against expectations? Do we have the capacity and the budget? Do we have the platforms and solutions in place? Do we actually have the key relationships where we can actually influence our organisations and our departments? Are we actually that strategical partner, or actually are we an order taker who are now moving towards sort of expected to sort of influence a number of decisions? And that could be particularly around skills frameworks, competency frameworks, career pathways, a number of different things. And definitely as a content aggregator, what we've definitely seen is that shift with our customers, with L&D teams being either on that start of the digital journey, or all of a sudden it's been taken more seriously, and they need to be coming up with equipping their workforce with the skills and capabilities. So it can be very overwhelming. We've definitely seen this with our customers, but it's an exciting challenge, an exciting place to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass back over to Ollie. Hopefully that sets some context behind where that disruption is coming through and how this is now starting to influence our organisations, with lots of different things coming in from lots of different angles. So Ollie, if I can just pass on to you to kind of give us some insight about sort of that complexity of the content landscape.
Great, thanks for that, Craig. I think, just to sort of echo again, we've got this sort of shift going on across organisations. There's clearly a growing and changing demand for skills, and as Craig's just described there, how are organisations tackling that? So I think if you assume that this context, as I said, is around digital content, and this pyramid's taken from Donald Taylor, who some of you may know as a sort of renowned thought leader across the industry, and this really reflects the complexity of content that goes out there. And I think just to sort of simplify this initially, I think the top half of the pyramid could be referred to as proprietary content. So that's the type of organisation that you typically create within or for your organisation. So can be very advantageous, very relevant, and absolutely bespoke, but actually very expensive to produce, whether that be your own resources or whether it be externally commissioned content. And I suppose part of the challenge there is that that can become quickly outdated and perhaps hard to benchmark against other providers. And then at the other end of the scale, you've sort of got web content. So there's a multitude of providers, and resources available for sort of content consumed by the internet. So amazing in that it's a wide pool of experience and expertise. I suppose the negative side is sort of, do you have the resource and capacity to be able to sort of filter through that and counterbalance some of the sort of relevancy of that and sort of suitability for that? So where we see sort of the opportunity really, and sort of more organisations trying to balance, is sort of what's the paid for portfolio of content in the middle, and that's really a sort of there's a few options there. Outsourced libraries, so sort of large specialist libraries related to specific types of content, whether that be technology or management and leadership, etc. Or potentially aggregators like ourselves that have sort of pulled all of that content into sort of a wider choice of format across multiple providers. And I think part of the challenge, or the sort of trade-off people have to make, is sort of what is the most appropriate content for my audience, my budget, and sort of my opportunity. I think what we're sort of within all of this, I think the most important thing is sort of how is that curated? So whether that's the freely available content or outsourced libraries or the amalgamation of all of that, how does that curated content become most appropriate to your organisation? So I just wanted to share this as a perhaps as a decision making framework. If you are considering investing in online learning, where do you start? In terms of sort of the volume of materials, contextual relevance, etc. I'm happy to take some questions on that after this. I think to sort of take a next step down, and these are sort of questions or challenges or compromises that perhaps you're familiar with, and certainly we're familiar with organisations working with them on a daily basis as to sort of help them understand the ultimate solution for them. So in a recent discussion I was doing with Craig, we polled an audience about what's the most important thing when considering content, and the number one answer was learner experience. So I think that's really when you have to start balancing that decision between does it need to be bespoke? As I said before, if you're developing it yourself, then you need expertise, you need resources which can be costly, or you need to go to an external organisation. So again, it can be a big investment, which is absolutely appropriate, perhaps if it's got a wide audience. So I think trying to balance when is it okay to be bespoke, high-end, contextually relevant. Absolutely not condoning that generic content solves every problem, but I think not every organisation has unlimited budget and capacity to be able to deliver these experiences. So I think you have to have that trade-off with learner experience between when it isn't appropriate to have bespoke content. I think again, when you're sort of considering perhaps the wider strategy, how many roles do you need to provide learning for? I think the stat from the World Economic Forum at the beginning of this discussion really demonstrated how more and more people are looking to invest in online learning, and the number one reason that we see for that is at the moment really driven by people being remote. So no longer can you run inductions or other form of training programs and getting everybody together. That was not that you can't do it, but it's becoming more challenging. So what's the breadth of content? The breadth of content is growing. I think the stat I heard from a recent discussion with the Learning and Performance Institute was that the last 18 months has really accelerated the transformation of learning by at least 5 years. So organisations that were on that journey are now really having to deliver more learning to more people through this format. And when we talk about breadth, there's also diversity of content. As Jamal said at the beginning, it's the opportunity of considering what is the most appropriate content in the eyes of the learner. And that's talking about, does somebody want animation? Does someone want more formal assessment? What is it that you're going to need? And again, knowing the market as we do and working with, over 200 providers, every organisation has a slightly different approach to their content, to their instructional design, and what is appropriate for some style of content may not be appropriate for another, and certainly not appropriate for each individual learner. I think as you become more specialist, absolutely there's the need to make sure that your specialist roles are supported, whether that be technology or finance, or I'm sure there's a number of others as well. So how important is it that you've got a subject matter expert to support those content ranges? So what we see time and again is actually perhaps the compromise and invest in those specialist areas, and then perhaps you've got a lower level of tolerance or expectation about the breadth and sort of diversity of content. One of the greatest challenges I think learning organisations are facing is sort of how do the various learning technologies that exist or HR technologies integrate. So again, if you're talking with multiple content providers, given the range of solutions that you need to serve your needs, can the integrations handle that? What happens if you need more content in sort of the upcoming period of time, having just gone through a lengthy process of deciding a vendor? As we said at the beginning, the pace of skills and the pace of change is so much so that what you need today might not be tomorrow. So how future-proof is the sort of content library of the organisations you're working with? And sort of, perhaps the most important sort of commercially, capacity. How much capacity does your internal team have to be able to support, curate, guide, assess, etc. And then, perhaps, the most important is sort of price. Do you need to do more with less? That's a sort of question that we're always asked. Perhaps budgets are being cut for you. Perhaps there's lack of resource. Perhaps there's pressure to deliver more. So there's a fair few areas to sort of reflect on there. And I'll just ask Craig, is there anything particular with your experience with customers, or some good examples of perhaps what that actually means for a customer, and sort of bring to life that for our audience today?
So first one I just wanted to talk about was breadth. So when we talk about breadth, it's kind of that full span of knowledge. And what we're experiencing at the moment, definitely from our customer portfolio, is that the requirements coming through from entry level in a topic or a skill and needing to build that up to an advanced level, which is really interesting. Now, you may see that in typical sort of software skills, but we're also seeing that in terms of sales enablement programs, management and leadership development programs as well, and then also kind of supporting the skills frameworks and specific functions and roles. I think I had one customer the other day that I was onboarding, and they had 12 core competencies and then 109 that kind of sat underneath that. Good thing is we were able to match their content and spot on, which is fantastic. I think the other one for me is around diversity, and definitely sort of learner preferences is strongly influencing, as ever, our customer base. And I think in particular what we're seeing is a bit more of a shift towards sort of micro learning to support sort of the learning in the flow of work, but also to support that blended learning approach. There are organisations that we're working with who are still wanting to do face-to-face. They're very nervous about obviously stopping doing that, because that's a great learner experience for certain members of their organisation. And what sort of that blended learning approach with diverse content can do is help to support pre and post learning of those face-to-face programmes as well. What we're seeing is that the longer duration courses actually is still being embedded. They typically tend to be more aligned to sort of programmes, or if you want a sort of a deeper dive in terms of subject matters. And what that does, it gives employees that flexibility and choice. I think the final one for me is just around capacity. I used to work before joining Go1 in a team of just a couple of people responsible for internal learning and development, and that puts pressure on people, but pressure on departments to kind of meet and exceed expectations. And definitely at the moment I'm working with HR professionals that L&D is not hasn't in the past actually been part of their remit, and now suddenly is, to L&D departments who are a department of 2 that are supporting and servicing organisations of 5,000-6,000 global sort of members of staff. So what we're seeing there from a capacity perspective is the ability to become lean and agile, but not to turn you off from actually adventuring onto a new type of solution that can support you, because you can lean on subject matter experts, you can lean on learning champions, you can lean on communities, management leadership communities, to really help you sort of drive that learning in digital culture, as well as that self-directed learning, to make things sort of achievable. So really it's about now opening the minds of learning practitioners to say, don't be put off, particularly around the capacity piece, but take into consideration all these different variants to make the best choice in terms of solution for you.
Great, thank you, Craig. So hopefully that gives some insight into some of the choices that you're going to need to make should you be sort of progressing down the digital journey. But I think some of those practices could also be applied across that. So just to sort of pull this together, and again I'll hand back to Craig, but I think as a sort of L&D practitioner, the most important thing, and why we're investing in learning in the first place, is to ultimately improve performance, whether that be an organisation or individuals' capability. So this is a model that we work with extensively with our clients, and we'd love to talk you through it, and to sort of hopefully you get some takeaways of how you can apply that within your context. Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. So this is kind of a combined knowledge of it, sort of working as an R&D practitioner, as well as utilising the experience of working with our different customers. And often what happens is many organisations don't have a sense of structure, and often what then happens is they're very reactive now, and think almost like a one-size-fits-all approach to kind of embedding something within their organisation. So this is very much tried and tested. We're We're hoping that you'll find it relatable and maybe use this as an opportunity to reflect, because some of the stuff that we're going to be sharing with you may not be new. But hopefully this will help you, if you're not using a sense of structure, combat some of those potential blockers and help you identify the skills that will help your sort of future force. So it's almost like the chapters in a book, really. You have a start, middle and end. So this is all around alignment, implementation and measurement. So we're just going to take you through each of those 3 stages. So if you can just move on to the first one, Ollie, just around sort of alignment. So this is really like any learning intervention, whether it's digital, face-to-face, platform, solution, technology people, it all starts with the why. So the why is such an important question, but often what we don't do is ask that very straightforward question. We don't often have that depth of understanding. We don't understand the evidence of need. We don't understand what the strategy looks like. And we end up having a lack of understanding of what the challenges are that are facing the business and why we're actually venturing sort of on this journey. So really what we need to be doing as a solution from this perspective is understanding the context of the issue, the requirements and the challenge, not getting carried away and jumping in too quickly, actually focusing on the problem, not the solution, and actually looking at whether this is an opportunity to reduce, from a digital perspective anyway, reduce that content spend. Can we improve our content coverage and flexibility? Can we increase the availability of our learning metadata, as well as identify and build the most important skills for the organization? And ultimately what that comes down to is the ultimate learner experience, what it should be and what it could be. But then looking sort of at the awareness of the needs and skills, which based on the topic that we're talking about today is really important. And this is kind of the start of the how. The issue is that we often make an assumption about what the requirements are within the business and often become the order taker without actually challenging what is required short term, long term, to help shape, sort of drive the organization and really get that alignment to the organizational business strategy, but also some of the strategies that kind of underpin that. Now, the solution here really is about thinking about early stakeholder engagement, building some of those crucial relationships, uncovering those business outcomes, getting out to the business and having some great conversations. As I said, it's not just about the here and now, it's about looking at the focus of the future in terms of actually where it is that we want to be. One of the things that I often would share with people is actually being prepared for the resistance and the difficult conversations, because you are going to come across the what's in it with for me. You're trying to make me align to what it is that you're trying to do, but why should I do that? What's in it for me? And what I think one of the biggest things for me is, understanding that don't sort of break things that don't need breaking, like look at where you can enhance them and make them even better. And I think the third most important thing here for alignment for me, and where many organizations struggle, is getting that exec buy-in. The earlier you do this, the better. That commitment and support to help drive you is going to help you achieve. And I think bringing somebody on at the beginning of that journey is really going to help. Don't be reactive. We need to be proactive. We need to inform, influence, justify, and really sell that benefit of demonstrating that we know and we understand the why and what that end goal looks like. So make sure that you plan, prioritize, do your research. Don't be naive to think that this is the only business priority. So once you've got that alignment piece, which is kind of the critical piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and what we now then talk about is the implementation phase, which is the bit where people tend to get most excited, because this is when things are starting to happen. And I think part of that breadth that we just talked about being one of your considerations is about choosing that best learning content for your audience and the outcomes. And often what we see is sometimes this can be quite overwhelming, whether it's the NLD practitioner within the organization that has all of a sudden got all these different skills, framework, core competencies coming out, not just from HR, but all the individual functions that they're talking to, can actually open up a massive minefield, then coupled with the content that's available. And I think that that's where that solution focus that you should be focusing on is really about taking that on as a positive challenge and really taking that opportunity to become that strategical partner, getting stakeholders involved. Don't feel like you have to be the only person that's involved with this project. Get people to help you influence the rest of the organisation, become those early advocates and really sort of drive that what's in it for me, but really get underneath the bare bones about sort of understanding what those learning preferences are and what those content requirements are for now and for in the future. The next bit is really just about testing the content with focus groups. There are certain organisations that want to go big bang. There are others that sort of want to be a bit sort of more gently driven. But this is really about having the opportunity to sense check the relevance of the content before it's released on certain audiences. And what this can do is actually can generate some real positivity and optimism and some advocates really early on. Here, it's really about understanding, do you have the capacity and the relationships to be able to do that? Do you also have the opportunity here, which is a great opportunity actually, particularly from a Go One's perspective, is about sensor checking that you've got the right content, that you're tagging the content. And also here, it's not underestimating the scale and the effort that's actually involved with doing that particular exercise to make sure that everything's in place. It's not missed, it's not wrong, it's specific enough, and it's defined tools as skill frameworks. I think the final piece of this here is about running the program and becoming agile. What we simply mean here is what approach you're going to follow to implement it successfully, but also what happens if things go wrong. Have you established the what ifs to ensure that you're fully prepared? But also, if you are wanting to encourage engagement, because often we see initial spike when we implement learning solutions, and then there's a tail of a drop-off, is making sure that you have a program that's in place where you can encourage ongoing campaigns, working with marketing and other key focuses of to ensure that this actually happens. The third step then is around measurement. So if we can just move on the slide. So this is the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle really, which is kind of demonstrating that value. And this is where essentially you can harness data and track outcomes, you can increase the visibility and kind of show that evidence. And part of doing that is really about utilizing data to become your best friend, your best ally, whether that's through reporting, whether that's referencing back to the needs, the outcomes and the objectives. It gives you real good insight in terms of what's working and what's not working. And really what you can start to do there is go on this continuous improvement cycle, which will really enable you to, deal with those spikes when they tend to drop off, or just make sure that you've got kind of that consistent trend following through. It also provides that, like I said, the increased visibility of raising the profile of your work, and definitely working in L&D. If you have successes, you start to prick up the ears of people within the business to say, well, I want a bit of what's going on over there. How do we have a bit of that? And how do we succeed and make that happen? So just some real key things there, particularly around the measurement piece. And often what we do here is we always track back to the why. Like how do we prove that it's been a successful impact? And whether that's a return on investment or return on expectations, the earlier you do that, the better. So that in a nutshell should give you a good indication of what's really driving success within Go One and previously at my other organisations. It's a really good structured framework to help you succeed with implementing.
Fantastic, thank you, Craig, and thank you all for listening. So I trust that you found that valuable. Recognise the challenges that we're facing, globally, and sort of the changes in the workforce. Just a sort of quick glimpse into the content market and the challenges of the decision making that you're facing, and some practical, useful tools that Craig shared to sort of help you on your journey to better align your learning to your organisation's business strategy. So thank you for your time. Would welcome any questions should there be any, and we will do our best to answer them effectively.
Thank you, Jamal, Ollie, and Craig.